The storm was relentless that night. Rain hammered against the windows like an army of tiny, relentless drummers, and the wind howled through the trees, making them sway and creak as if they were giant, wailing creatures. I was 13 and home alone for the night. Something I was used to, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was the storm, or maybe it was just the dark and the way it seemed to close in around the house, but I felt an unsettling edge to my usual solitude. The lights flickered once, then twice. I was huddled on the couch in the living room, wrapped in a blanket and watching reruns of my favorite TV show, trying to ignore the ominous rumble of thunder. Just as I was about to lose myself in the show, the doorbell rang. The sudden chime made me jump, and I froze, staring at the door with wide eyes. My heart pounded as I glanced at the clock, nearly midnight. Who could be ringing the doorbell at this hour, especially with the storm raging outside? I cautiously stood up and peered through the peephole, but all I saw was darkness and rain. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. I didn't recognize any car in the driveway, and the last thing I wanted was to open the door to some stranger. I crept quietly through the house, trying to keep my footsteps as light as possible. I went to the window by the front door and tried to see if anyone was standing on the porch, but the rain made it nearly impossible. I saw shadows flitting across the glass, and it gave me a shiver. I decided to play it safe and just stayed hidden, hoping whoever it was would eventually leave. After a few minutes, the doorbell rang again, followed by a loud knock. My heart was racing, and I could feel a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. I took a deep breath, hoping to steady my nerves, and then the sound that made my blood run cold happened. The back door creaked open. I wasn't sure how I knew it was the back door, but I did. The sound of footsteps echoed through the house, soft but unmistakable. I quietly made my way to the garage door, hoping to find a way out. My parents had always told me to avoid confrontation and get to safety if ever in trouble, so that's exactly what I did. The garage was cold and cluttered with old furniture and boxes. I fumbled with the door handle, finally managing to pry it open just as the footsteps got closer. I sprinted across the driveway to the neighbor's house, my heart hammering in my chest. The wind and rain lashed at me as I banged on their door, desperation clear in my voice, when I finally shouted, "Help! There's someone in my house!" The neighbor, Mr. Thompson, who always seemed so calm and friendly, came to the door immediately. He took one look at my drenched, frightened face, and without a word, grabbed his phone and dialed 911. He reassured me that the police were on their way and said we should wait inside his house. It felt like an eternity, but finally the sound of sirens cut through the storm. I was shaking as the police officers arrived and took my statement. They asked Mr. Thompson a few questions and then headed over to my house. It felt like the longest few minutes of my life, just waiting and wondering if the intruder had left, or if they were still inside. When the police finally came back, they told me that they had found the intruder and had him in custody. He had broken through the back door, just as I had feared. I could barely process it all, still feeling the lingering adrenaline coursing through my veins. As the officers went through the house to make sure everything was in order, Mr. Thompson made sure I was all right, offering me a hot drink to warm up. I thanked him over and over, unable to express how relieved I was. The storm had finally started to ease, the rain now a mere drizzle. My parents came home the next morning, tired but relieved to find me safe and sound. I told them everything that happened, and they were incredibly proud of how I handled the situation. I knew I'd never forget that stormy night, the night I faced a real danger, but also the night I learned the importance of staying calm and seeking help. Looking back, the storm wasn't just a backdrop to that night. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's always a way to find safety and support. The thunderstorm hit with a vengeance that night. Lightning slashed across the sky like jagged knives, and the wind howled as if it were morning. The house was cloaked in darkness, the power having gone out a few hours earlier, just as the storm reached its peak. The only light came from the occasional flash of lightning that briefly illuminated the room before plunging everything back into pitch black. I was lying in bed, wrapped in blankets, trying to ignore the howling wind and the constant, uneasy rumble of thunder. I was a young adult living with my grandparents while I finished college, and their home, though cozy, seemed cavernous in the dark. I hadn't expected to be awake at this hour, but the storm had left me restless. I lay there for a while, listening to the rain battering against the windows before realizing I was parched. I decided to get up and grab a glass of water from the kitchen. I stumbled through the darkened hallway, my phone flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. As I approached the kitchen, I noticed something unusual. The patio door, which usually clicked shut securely, was slightly ajar. My heart skipped a beat. I was certain I had locked it before bed. A shiver ran down my spine, but I forced myself to push the thought away. It was probably just the wind. I closed the patio door and checked the lock, making sure it was secure. As I turned to head back to bed, the faintest noise from the bedroom caught my attention. My heart pounded harder as I slowly made my way back to my room. The storm raged on outside, but inside, the only sounds were the creaks of the house and my own footsteps. I opened my bedroom door cautiously, and as my flashlight flickered over the room, I saw it. Underneath the bed, two bloodshot eyes were glaring back at me. I froze, the shock rendering me almost immobile. The eyes were wide and unblinking, and the sight of them sent a cold wave of fear through me. I tried to take a deep breath, but my chest felt tight. I backed away slowly, my mind racing to process what I was seeing. The woman's eyes, pale, frantic, were fixed on me, and her presence under the bed was inexplicable and terrifying. I knew I had to get out of there, but I couldn't tear my gaze away from those eyes. I sprinted out of my room and down the hall, barely registering the disorientation of the darkness around me. I burst into my grandparents' bedroom, shaking and breathless. "Grandma! Grandpa, wake up! There's someone in the house!" My voice was a desperate whisper, urgent and trembling. My grandparents were awake almost instantly, their faces etched with concern. I explained as quickly as I could about the strange woman under my bed. My grandfather, a former police officer, grabbed a flashlight and a baseball bat, while my grandmother fumbled with her phone to call for help. We moved through the house, carefully, sticking close to each other. But when we checked my room, the woman was gone. There was no sign of her, no trace of anything out of the ordinary besides the eerie sensation that someone had been there. We searched the house thoroughly, but she had disappeared as mysteriously as she had appeared. We decided not to involve the police, as the intruder had vanished without a trace, and nothing seemed to be missing. Instead, we took immediate security measures. My grandfather reinforced the locks on all the doors, and we installed additional outdoor lighting. The incident left us all on edge, but we found solace in the newfound safety measures and the fact that, as far as we could tell, the woman had left without causing any harm. In the days that followed, the storm seemed like a distant memory, overshadowed by the lingering unease of that night. I tried to return to my routine, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even in the safe, well-lit confines of our home. The storm had passed, but it left behind a heightened sense of vigilance and a reminder that even in the darkest hours, there can be unseen dangers lurking just beyond the edge of our awareness. The remote mobile home nestled in the woods was supposed to be a peaceful retreat from our hectic lives. My boyfriend, Alex, and I had rented it for the weekend, eager for some quiet time together, away from city noise and responsibilities. The storm started brewing late in the afternoon, clouds rolling in and darkening the sky. By evening, rain was pouring down in sheets, and the wind howled through the trees. We were curled up on the couch, enjoying a movie marathon with candles flickering around us, the power having gone out a few hours earlier. The storm's intensity was impressive, but it was also oddly soothing. Just as we were getting cozy with a bowl of popcorn, we heard a voice, a faint, distant call that seemed to drift through the storm. It was barely audible over the wind and rain, but it was there. "What was that?" Alex asked, glancing at me with a puzzled expression. "I didn't hear anything," I replied, though I had definitely heard something. I tried to shrug it off, but the voice had sounded almost desperate. A few minutes later, as the wind picked up, we noticed a shadow moving outside. Through the rain-streaked window, it was hard to make out details, but it looked like a figure standing far off in the woods. Alex squinted and said, "Do you see that? There's someone out there." My heart raced. "Should we check it out?" I asked, though I wasn't sure if wanted to. Before Alex could answer, something even more unsettling happened. A brightly colored figure, someone wearing a raincoat of vivid red and yellow, appeared much closer, right by the deck. The bright colors stood out starkly against the dark backdrop of the storm. We exchanged nervous glances. "That's way too close," Alex said, his voice low and tense. The figure stood still, facing us, but didn't move or make a sound. The storm's fury seemed to have amplified the situation, making the figure's presence even more eerie. Just as we were debating whether we should call for help or stay inside, the sounds started. There were strange noises at the door, scratching and muffled thumps. We both froze, our eyes locked on the door, as the sounds intensified. Then came the banging on the windows. The storm was loud, but the rhythmic pounding was unmistakable and unnerving. "I'm getting the rifle," Alex said, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. He grabbed the rifle from the closet where we kept it for emergencies, and I could see his hand shaking slightly as he checked it. I could barely breathe, my mind racing with possible scenarios. The banging continued, the noise seeming to grow louder and more insistent. Alex moved cautiously to the door, his steps deliberate and slow. With a deep breath, he opened the door just enough to step outside onto the deck, rifle in hand. He aimed at the figure in the bright raincoat and shouted, "Get away from the house! We're armed!" The figure, along with the shadowy figures we had seen in the distance, scattered quickly into the woods. The noise stopped abruptly, leaving only the sound of the storm and our own heavy breathing. Alex and I stayed alert for a few more minutes, our eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The storm raged on, but the immediate threat seemed to have passed. "I don't know what their deal was," Alex said, coming back inside and locking the door securely behind him. "But I think we should get out of here early tomorrow." I nodded in agreement, still shaken, but relieved that we were safe, for now. We spent the rest of the night trying to calm down, our earlier plans for a romantic getaway completely derailed. We didn't sleep much, each creak of the mobile home making us jump. When morning finally came, the storm had moved on, leaving behind a soaked landscape. We packed up quickly, eager to leave the unsettling experience behind. As we drove away, we both glanced back at the mobile home, half expecting to see someone watching us from the edge of the woods. The motives of the figures who had disturbed our weekend remained a mystery. The storm had passed, but the unnerving memory of those strange encounters would linger for a long time. We vowed to stick to safer, less isolated getaways in the future. Our peaceful retreat forever tainted by the night when the storm brought more than just rain and wind.